Well, today I'm very excited to have Kristy-Lee Billett with us on the show. Kristy, it's fabulous to have you here.
Thanks, Kate. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful. Now, you work in the world of HR, wonderful world of HR. I do lots of work with people in HR. It's a fascinating space. Tell me, how did you get into it? How did this happen?
I think, like many people, not by intention is the short answer. So I left school and studied forensic psychology, of all things, at uni. So I learned how to profile serial killers and all about criminology, and had aspirations of working in that field. But at that time, Australia didn't employ a whole lot of people in that field. And like all young people, I planned to do a bit of travel and went to just get a little job to fill in the gap between my travel, and ended up at a recruitment agency as a recruiter. What I quickly learned was all that psychology knowledge was actually quite helpful in that space, but also I could find the best possible person for my clients. But if everything within the business around HR was broken or non-existent beyond that, it was like a revolving door. So I set about studying my master's in HR and ultimately started my own business about 19 years ago in recruitment at that stage, and now a HR consultancy and HR advisory business for small to medium-sized business owners.
Wow, how fascinating. Criminology would have been fantastic to study as well.
Very interesting, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of crime on the ABC.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an extraordinary step from going from forensic psychology into HR, but incredibly practical, and being able to apply that knowledge in a very important part of business.
Absolutely. All of that kind of psychology is really about, for me, patterns of behaviour, and very much that's what I work with my clients on at the moment, is seeing those patterns of behaviour in our people in our business and what that might be telling us about where they're at, how things are tracking for them, and how we can improve that for them at work.
Yeah. Behaviour is always a form of communication.
Absolutely.
So you talk a lot about creating people-powered businesses. In your experience, what are some of the biggest mindset shifts leaders need to make when they want to truly harness the power of their team?
It's such a great question, because I think I work with a lot of business owners specifically, and when people start their businesses, they start because they have an idea, because they've got a particular passion or skill set, or they want to make an impact in the world, but they don't think ahead to the fact that they're actually going to have a team at some point if they want to grow a successful business. And I have a really deep belief that you can't have a business that is successful by all the measures and that gives you any sense of freedom from that business without the right people on the team. And so team is essential to having a business that delivers you that freedom, so you're not doing 80-hour weeks, and that is successful. But business owners don't go into business usually, in my experience, with that in mind. So they find themselves stuck often in a cycle of either micromanaging or just not leading at all, the non-boss boss, I call them. And that ends in just a business that isn't growing, that isn't successful, and them getting frustrated. And I think for most business owners particularly, and I think this is true of leaders in a lot of cases, is learning to let go is a huge mindset shift, because we're perfectionists, we're sometimes control freaks, and we think that we have to have our finger in every pie for things to be functioning well, and actually nothing could be further from the truth a lot of the time. So that learning to let go is a huge mindset shift. And on top of that, the concept that 80% done by someone else is far better than 100% done by us. And that process of learning to delegate effectively, coach and train people to get them to where we want them to be, and let them do things their way, because not everything has to be done our way. They're probably some of the biggest mindset shifts. And on top of that, it's that cloning yourself is not the solution, and having really solid but well sort of researched expectations on what's possible for our team is really important, because the expectations mismatch is another place that I see things go wrong. So there's a lot of mindset shifts really, but they all tend to centre around those kinds of themes, I find.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's hard to let go when it's your baby.
Yes.
And everyone's looking at you.
Yes, there's the fear of failure, there's all the things that go with it. And I think this is true if we're just stepping into leadership within our career, or if it's our own business. It is that if I've got control of it, then I can make sure it's on track and it's right and everything's going to go perfectly. Where if I let go of control, I might lose control and things are going to go off the rails and it's going to be a disaster. And that's not the case, but it's a hard lesson to learn.
Well, it is a hard lesson. And I think it goes to your other comment around expectations, because if we're so much in the business, we often forget to communicate our expectations.
Yes.
And we don't communicate our expectations very well. And then the person doesn't do what we wanted them to do. So that's further evidence that we can't trust them to do the job, which we haven't communicated effectively in the first place. And it sort of becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that I can't trust you to do the job, so I'll just have to do it myself.
And of
it's
course, in that
communication.
process, our team are reading into this that I'm not trusted, so I'm not going to step up and show initiative or be innovative or come to a solution because they don't trust me to do that. So I'm just going to shrink down and do less and less and less. And it is 100% all comes down to communication. And I know I've listened to some of the episodes of this podcast previously. I know you love to talk about the DISC profiling report, and I use that with clients all the time because that, I call it the translation code, learning how to translate your natural DISC communication style into a language or content that your team's going to hear and understand. But that does create, there's so many gaps in the communication that is the problem.
So true. It is a fascinating place. And then, of course, and this goes to our next question around creating a positive workplace culture. But one of the messages I hear from leaders so often is that this team lacks initiative, which is exactly what we were just talking about, that when the more we do, the less we trust, the less people are going to use their initiative. They're not going to speak up. So our leaders want these high-performing teams. They want to build a positive workplace culture. So that's the goal. It's not what happens. How do we guide people to that without burning people out or being, what we considered soft, which a lot of employers think that if you're kind and empathetic, that's a softness, which is not true. So how do we help people on that journey? How do we help people let go and communicate better?
It's a really interesting question. And I think the important thing to remember is high-performing teams and positive workplace cultures aren't mutually exclusive concepts. They can both exist in perfect unison if we get it right.
Yes.
I think one of the challenges I see people and leaders make is they think that being clear is being bossy or being mean or micromanaging, and nothing is further from the truth. I love the Brené Brown quote that clear is kind and unclear is unkind. If we're clear about expectations, like we were saying earlier, about performance measurements, about KPIs, about what we're trying to achieve, then that's actually really helpful for our team in terms of delivering on those expectations. So I think being really clear is really important. Now, and I work with teams a lot too on creating a common language about what's acceptable, performance, behaviour, and those kind of things, and what's not acceptable. So that kind of above the line, below the line framework I love to use a lot, because then the team keep each other accountable. And actually people tend to want to let their colleagues down far less than they're worried about letting their boss down. Yeah. So if you can create that lovely common language, common expectations, common threads around things, it can be really helpful, not only for the clarity piece, but also to keep people performing at a level that is what you're expecting. But I think so often it comes down to we have these expectations of what a high performance team looks like, but we've not told any of the team what that is. Yeah. And so how can we expect them to meet those goals? So, setting really clear KPIs that are aligned with your objectives and your goals and your vision and your values and those kinds of things, and keeping people on track towards achieving those, helping them to achieve those. Yeah. People want to leave work thinking, I've done a good job today. They generally don't want to leave work feeling like they've failed. So if you can get that right, then you're going to have a really positive workplace culture because people are going to feel good about what they're doing.
Yeah. So as part of your role, do you assist leaders to create those KPIs?
Yes, absolutely. I do work with particularly members of our people-powered HR community a lot because they're small businesses and this sometimes is all new work for them, and they find it really hard to set clear KPIs, sometimes because they're not clear in their own mind what success looks like in the role, but sometimes because it can be a bit tricky to craft really good KPIs. And I use the SMART acronym a lot in the goal setting and KPI setting I do just because it's easy to follow and I like an easy to follow framework. So that, a specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, time bound, those kind of things. That's a great framework to use, but it's usually about taking all the fluff out of it and just making it really simple.
Do you, and I think that that's really important. And I think that leaders can get so close to the work that they don't actually know how to create the KPI. They just want it to be better.
Yes.
And so we all know that that's great advice. Just do it better. Like, what does better mean?
That's not helpful.
It's not very, very helpful. And sometimes it is really helpful to have somebody working with you alongside you who's got that clarity, who can help you set that. Do you then assist leaders then with performance management and how to utilize those KPIs
Yeah.
effectively?
Yeah, I really love working with the leaders I work with to help them and empower them really to be able to do this kind of work themselves, because I'll often get, contact from someone that will say, "Can you just come in and do this bit for me?" I can, but it's not very helpful if I do that, because you need to learn this if you're going to run a business or lead a team. So I love working with business owners and leaders to help them to have those conversations and communicate more clearly and effectively and hold those boundaries firm around KPIs. If this is the KPI, let's get clear about what success looks like. And if we're not tracking there, what do we need to do? What curious conversations do we need to have? How are we going to have those conversations, and putting those structures in place?
Yeah. And curious conversations is really what it is. And they don't have to be scary.
Absolutely not. No, I think curious is a superpower we don't tap into enough as leaders, and we really should. It's so powerful.
Yeah. This is so true. And I think that one of the things that I come across all the time is leaders avoiding having those conversations because they doubt themselves. They're concerned about where the conversation's going to go. They don't want the person to leave, all the things. And they can often just exacerbate small problems into bigger problems. And just a quick, curious conversation which says, what's going on here? Like, help me better understand why that happened. Not being critical, but just need to know. Let's explore this together.
Exactly. Yeah, you've really got to seek to understand where that person is and where they're coming from. And I think the trap that so many of us fall into is we start to make assumptions based
Yes.
on, we've seen this before, we know what's happening for this person, or this is definitely what's going on for them. We don't know. So we need to remove those assumptions and get curious.
Yeah. I think curiosity is fantastic. I think the other thing too is I've got a client at the moment who said we're very busy, and they're very, very busy, and the board has said they have to introduce one-on-ones, and it's sort of like, okay, we don't have time to do that. It's like, okay, we don't know how to do that. Is this something you come across?
Yeah, I get a lot of resistance around meetings and how many meetings we need to have and what's the purpose of the meetings. And especially if it's a directive that's come from a board or someone that is a little removed from the business, often it's, what's the purpose of the recommendation? Are they putting this in place because they've read it somewhere that this was a really good plan and they should just go ahead and do that? Or what's the purpose of having the one-on-ones? Because if it's got a clear purpose, it's often really worth making time for.
Yeah.
And also, one-on-ones can be very valuable, especially if the team's busy. It's
Yeah.
actually maybe the only time you're getting to connect with that team member one-on-one. And I've got teams also that I work with that they're incredibly busy and their days are full, and I still encourage them to carve out those times, but also to get rid of other meetings that aren't particularly valuable. So I think, yes, when we're busy, these things often, I see performance management, performance reviews fall by the wayside when people get busy and they just don't get done. The message that sends to the team isn't great either. So I think creating that time, and if it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be an hour meeting,
Yeah.
but a 10-minute check-in with someone one-on-one, and it can be, 3 simple questions. How are things tracking? What's working? What's not working? Like, it doesn't have to be rocket science, but that just allows them to feel heard and seen and valued. So I know that it can be frustrating, but if there's real purpose to the meetings, I think they're worth having.
Yeah. I think there's some value in that too. And I also think that your comment before around we get busy, all these things fall by the wayside. And I've done a lot of work in regional Australia, and often they struggle to attract staff,
Yes.
and often they are a bit lawless in that we've just done it this way and we don't want to rock the boat. And if we rock the boat, people will leave. And there's this sort of, again, this story they tell themselves that if they were to have the difficult conversations, if they were to hold boundaries firmly or whatever, that would be a bad outcome. That might lead to more people leaving. Have you got experience of that? Because it's been a really significant part of my working world.
Yeah, I definitely see that, particularly with some industries at the moment where talent is incredibly hard to come by. And
Yeah.
that is certainly exacerbated if you're regional or rural sort of area. And people are scared. I see
Yes.
business owners and leaders scared to make tough decisions, to choose not to hire someone because they know that this is not the right person. They know that the values alignment isn't there, but
Yeah.
they're desperate. So they
Yeah.
make poor decisions, even though it's against their gut instinct. And I get that that's particularly challenging in those environments where you can't just go to market and hire someone else tomorrow. I've got clients I work with where we've been looking for a staff member for 6, 9 months because it is really hard to find people. But is it worse by having the wrong person on the team? Is it worse by not having that conversation? Because when you avoid the conversations, the tough conversations, the rest of the team are watching and they're
Yeah.
watching your lack of action, and that erodes their trust in you, their faith in you as a leader. And you're not going to get the best out of them if that's how they're feeling, or even worse, they're a flight risk. And you're going to lose your best people because you didn't want to deal with your poor performer. So it can be scary, and I do understand the fear, particularly if you're in those areas where it is tougher to find
Yeah.
people, to attract people. But think about what the result of not acting and not having the conversation is. And I would suggest in almost every case, the outcome's worse.
Oh yeah. I think that is so true. And I've worked in many an organization where they have retained somebody who has been a golden performer of some sort. We can't live without this person. But this person's behavior is outrageously toxic
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace, has never been properly addressed, which is often an incredibly unfair outcome for them too, because they often keep going along, behaving in a certain manner, and no one's saying that there's a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the perfect storm arises, and this person will often leave because suddenly they're forced to call out the behavior or whatever. And people can breathe again. And it just always is extraordinary to me what we do hold on to. We hold on to great performers. We tolerate. You wouldn't tolerate it anywhere else. Why do we tolerate it?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think just because someone is technically exceptional at their job does not mean they are the best person for your team. And if they're behaving in a way that is toxic, that is challenging, that is problematic with the morale and the culture of the business, the damage that they are doing is far worse than any benefit you're getting out of their, exceptional technical skills. And I see people tolerate that all the time. And I really like your point earlier, Kate, about we haven't had the conversations early enough. And when we finally do, it's quite unfair on the employee because they're seeing this huge reaction because we're reacting to the compound effect of what's been going on for 6 months. All they're seeing is the change between yesterday and today, which is often minuscule. And so to them, it looks like a huge overreaction, and they often then react or counter-react in a way that is, perhaps a little bit emotive and quite angry and aggressive. And that's fair because we haven't given them the information and the intel, early enough and helped them to course correct. But I definitely always say you cannot tolerate that kind of person in a business. The damage they will do is far worse than any benefit you're getting.
Absolutely. And it's also, I mean, one, it's not good for the business. And two, when we tolerate behavior, I did one piece of work where somebody had been perceived as a problem for 30 years
Mm-hmm.
in government and it had 30 years. And it really came to a very significant head. And then somebody had to tell this person about the challenges in their behavior. And of course, the shame that this person then feels knowing that people have been talking about them behind their backs for up to 30 years because of behavior, because nobody had the courage to call it out. I do a lot of calling out what I see, but I can't call out things I don't see. But I just think clear is kind. Clear is kind. And we should treat people with respect because the consequences then, not just of that team, but also of that individual, particularly if it has been a long-term issue. And then suddenly there's a major crisis and that person is forced to leave or leaves because of shame. It's a terrible outcome.
And we've got to remember that that person may be brilliant in another organisation. It's just a
Absolutely.
values misalignment or a cultural misalignment that exists that makes them not suitable for our business.
Yeah.
But they could be a brilliant fit, a perfect cultural fit in another business. So this is not personal. This is about, does this combination of things work? And if it doesn't, have the conversations early.
Yeah. Look after people.
Yes.
That's what I think it's all
It's
about.
fairly
It's
simple.
about looking after people. Well, I think it is. I often think that leadership is simple because it is about looking after people, but it's also hard because of our own our own psychology and our own, challenges that we all have. I mean, I haven't met the perfect person yet. Keep looking, but
Absolutely not.
if we're looking after people, that also often should be a helpful guide in decision making.
Yeah. And I think people get confused with what looking after people looks like, because
Yes.
it's not avoiding conversations that might make you feel uncomfortable or even them feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's not having those conversations. It's about, how can I do this in a way that is kind to them and fair to them?
Yeah. I just often think, what would I like to know? And if I'm not performing well, I'd really like you to tell me, but I'd really like you to tell me in a way that was kind and curious and wasn't telling me off and treating me like I'm a child, which is some of the behaviours that you see from time to time. So I think that HR just then plays an extraordinary role in business, because they are often turned to step in on behalf of the leader, because the leader won't have the conversations. So I'm struggling with this. I know, we'll call HR.
Yes.
How does that go for you?
Look, it is a challenge. And I think, this is looked at in a couple of different ways. If you're in an organisation that is a size where you've got in-house HR, of course, they should be able to support you in those conversations. However, I don't think HR should be responsible for having all of those conversations on behalf of every leader, even if you've got a HR team. They should be there to support you, to guide you, to demonstrate what a good conversation looks like. But I think every leader should be able to have those conversations, because guess what? Your team don't want to hear it from HR. They want to hear it from you. So I think HR can be incredibly helpful in an organisation in helping to guide and shape how that looks. And also, HR is there for so many other reasons in many businesses, particularly if you've got a business that is very compliance driven from the Fair Work Act and those kind of structures. HR's got a big job to do in keeping all of that on track as well. So their role isn't just about this kind of thing, but they absolutely can play a really solid role there. And if you don't have in-house HR, and unless you've got at least 50 employees, I don't think you should have in-house HR. But what happens then? It all does fall back on you or your operations manager or your team leaders, depending on your structure. And so getting them support to develop those leadership skills, because no one gives you the manual of how to be a boss and how to run a team effectively. You learn it on the fly. So getting support for those people that are in those positions can be really valuable. And I see that a lot in businesses with really technical people that step into team leadership roles. It's such a hard transition for them. And they're often plonked in there because they're technically exceptional at whatever their career is, but are given no scope and no training and no development on how to be the team leader. And it is a different role. So giving people the support, I think, is really important.
I think that is so true. I mean, I regularly talk about people end up in leadership because they're really good at something else.
Yes.
So like, congratulations. Hooray. You're so good. You can now manage 20 people.
Yes.
All right. Bring
And
it
they
on.
hate it, don't they?
They hate it.
Yep.
I know. I have a good friend who's an engineer who was the head of a company who retired back to being an engineer so that he could finish his career just doing what he loved, which is so true. But I think the other thing that you said there that I think is really important is that people don't want to hear the feedback from HR. And I think it's actually really unfair to hear the feedback from HR, because one, it shows that leadership has gone to HR and dobbed.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of basically they're saying that now HR has authority when in fact they don't.
Yes.
And two, it makes HR the bad guys.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
sort of like good cop, bad cop. I'll tell you when you're doing a really good job, and I'll get HR to tell you when there's a problem.
Exactly.
Not
And it's
fair.
not fair, and it's absolutely not helpful in terms
No.
of the structure. I have businesses reach out to me all the time and say, can you just come in and run our performance review program? And I just say, no, that would be really silly if I did that. It would not be helpful for your team. I'm happy to help you. I'm happy to build out the program for you and show you how to run it. But having me do that is not a good solution for you. So they're constantly trying to abdicate that leadership role in their business, and it's not the right solution, no matter any size of the business. So it is important to get the strategy and the advice and support from HR, but not to have them jump in and be that bad cop every time.
I think it undermines the culture of the team when that happens.
And also, if you want your team to go to HR, if they've got a problem that they feel like they can't express, they're not going to go to HR if they think HR are the bad guys.
No, that's exactly right. But I think there are a number of managers I've come across along my travels who have said, but isn't that an HR problem? And it's not. It's a leadership issue.
Yeah, and I think this is where the structure of the business can really show some problems. If you see HR as a function that just looks after all the people stuff, totally separate to operations or anything else, no one's taking full accountability there.
No. Time always goes fast on this podcast. I don't know why, but it just does. Tell me, if you could wave a magic wand, what would be the number one thing that you would ask, that as an HR manager, you'd ask leaders to do?
So many things. This is really tough to narrow it down to one, but I would say make better hiring decisions every time. Because so often the problems we're dealing with down the track are because it's a hiring decision issue. Not necessarily that we've hired a terrible person, but we've either not understood the role and not hired the correct person for that role. We've hired out of haste, even though we know it's not the right person. We've hired because they're technically brilliant, even though we know they don't fit the team. We've hired at the wrong time and we haven't been able to effectively onboard and set them up for success. So many of the issues that I see people dealing with, whether it's 12 months in or 20 years in, are because it's a hiring mistake at the outset. If we can fix those mistakes, we'll generally have less people issues to deal with.
That is very wise advice. And I often think about when people say they want to avoid conflict like the plague.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, there's some really good ways to avoid conflict. And that's to plan really well and to set yourself up for success and share your expectations and do all of those things first so that you're not then putting out fires down the track.
Exactly. And that's what almost, I would say the vast majority of all the problems that you and I deal with in our day-to-day with the teams we work with come from that.
Yeah, I think that is so, so very true. And that's why it's sort of like, and they sort of look at you as though, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. It's like, but you don't do it.
But you're not doing it. No, I work with teams constantly who are, we've got this problem. They just haven't asked the right interview questions to get the right information. Like there's a million different ways things could go wrong in that initial process.
Yeah. Yes.
But that's where most of the holes are.
Yeah. Amazing. Kristy-Lee, this has just been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with that forensic psychologist brain of yours. How extraordinary. Thank you very much for that. And I wish you well. You're based in New South Wales?
I am, yeah. I service businesses right across Australia, but I am based in New South Wales up along the coast north of Sydney. So I really appreciate you having me on the show today, Kate. It's been great to chat to you.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Wanna hear you go.